At 2:17 in the morning, a weather relay station on a dead island sent one final transmission. The station had been silent for 11 years. No ships had docked there, no aircraft had landed, no maintenance team had visited since the evacuation. But for 17 seconds, the old system came back to life. It transmitted a burst of sound across 3 emergency bands. Not a distress call, not a mechanical failure, not static. It was a human voice, cold, weak, distorted. And at the end of the recording, just before the signal cut out, the voice said 5 words no one has ever explained. It is under the station, then everything went silent again. The island is still empty, the station is still locked, and the final transmission still has no explanation. There are places on Earth where silence feels unnatural, not peaceful, not calm, wrong. Far north of the shipping routes, beyond the usual paths of cargo vessels and research crews, there is a chain of volcanic islands surrounded by black water and permanent fog. Most of them are uninhabited. A few once held small scientific outposts, weather towers, radio huts, emergency shelters, temporary places built by people who stayed only long enough to collect data, then left before winter sealed the sea. One of those places was Halcyon Station. It stood on the edge of a basalt cliff above a narrow frozen bay. The building was simple. Steel walls, concrete footings, a transmission mast. Fuel drums buried against the wind. Inside, there were sleeping quarters, instrument panels, an old galley, backup batteries, and a relay console used to send weather data to the mainland every 6 hours. For years, Halcyon Station was ordinary. Then it was abandoned in a hurry. Official reports blamed structural instability after a series of small volcanic tremors. Unofficial reports were less clear. Crew members spoke about electrical failures, sounds in the walls, equipment shutting down at the same time every night. One technician refused to return after claiming he heard footsteps below the foundation, even though the station had no basement. Within 3 weeks, the site was closed. The doors were sealed. The windows were covered. The radio mast was left to rust in the wind. And for more than a decade, Halcyon Station became just another forgotten mark on an old chart, until the night it spoke again. Remote stations like Halcyon are built to survive isolation, but not mystery. Their design is practical. Harsh weather, limited power. Minimal staff, nothing unnecessary. Systems are simple because simple systems fail less often. Radios are hardened against moisture. Backup batteries are shielded from cold. Antennas are grounded against storms. Most functions can continue even after months of neglect, but time destroys everything. Salt enters metal seams, ice cracks concrete. Wires stiffen and split. Fuel turns unusable, seals fail. After 11 years without maintenance, Halcyon Station should not have been able to transmit anything. Its batteries should have been dead. Its circuitry should have corroded. Its mast should have carried only wind. That is what made the signal so disturbing. The transmission was not random. It was routed through the station's old emergency relay code. It identified itself with Halcyon's registration signature. That part alone suggested internal system access. But the deeper problem came from the signal quality. Engineers later determined the broadcast had been locally powered. Not bounced, not spoofed from orbit, not copied from an archive. Something at Halcyon Station had activated the transmitter from inside the network itself. The island's geography only made the situation worse. Halcyon was difficult to reach even in summer. Narrow landing conditions, sharp rock shelves beneath the surface, dense fog, violent current shifts. In winter, access was nearly impossible. Sea ice formed unpredictably. Winds could pin a helicopter in place or throw it sideways into the cliffs. Science could explain the danger of the island. Science could explain corrosion, isolation, weather, and system decay. But science had a harder time explaining why an empty relay station, sealed and deserted for 11 years, would wake in the middle of the night and send out a human voice from nowhere. And when investigators pulled the original archived crew files, they found something else. During the last month before evacuation, station logs mentioned interference not on one band, on all bands. Low pulses repeated at regular intervals. Always from below the station, always strongest at night. At the time, the readings were dismissed as geothermal noise. After the final transmission, those old entries were read very differently. The signal was first received by a marine traffic monitor on the mainland. At 2 hours 17 minutes and 43 seconds, the operator heard a clipped burst over an emergency frequency usually reserved for weather hazards and vessel alerts. The waveform was weak but structured. He flagged it, recorded it, and passed it to the regional network. Within minutes, 2 more receiving stations confirmed the same origin point, Halcyon. At first, the assumption was simple: a glitch, a reflected signal. Some old relay system failing one last time. Then the audio team cleaned the recording. Beneath the hiss of static, a pattern emerged. Metallic banging in the background, a slow repeating thud. Then breath. Uneven, exhausted, as if the speaker had been running or climbing or struggling to stay calm. Then the voice, not loud, not clear, but human. It said, ... if anyone receives this. A pause followed, for seconds of electrical noise. Then a scraping sound, like a microphone rubbing against fabric or concrete. They were wrong about the depth. Another pause. The thudding sound continued in the background, slow, heavy, rhythmic. It did not sound like machinery. It sounded closer to impact, metal under strain. Something pressing from the other side. Then the voice returned, lower now, shaking. There is another level. The final sentence came almost as a whisper. It is under the station. At that exact moment, the waveform surged, peaked, and cut to black. No sign off, no crash, no static tail, just absence. The relay station returned to silence so completely that it was as if the signal had never existed. Weather conditions delayed the first response team by 36 hours. When they finally approached the island by helicopter, Halcyon Station looked untouched. No smoke, no lights, no open doors. No visible tracks in the snow around the building. From the air, it looked dead. But the snow on the roof had melted in one narrow line above the central corridor, as if something inside was still warm. The first team landed at noon under low cloud and hard wind. They were not ghost hunters or thrill seekers. They were a structural engineer, a communications specialist, two recovery officers, and a regional safety inspector. Their task was simple: secure the site, confirm weather power had somehow returned, identify the source of the transmission. The outer lock on Halcyon Station was still sealed with the original evacuation plate. It had not been cut. It had not been removed. It had not even been loosened. The officers had to breach the door themselves. Inside, the air was stale and painfully cold. Frost feathered the corners of the walls. Dust lay undisturbed over tables, bunks, and instruments. Cupboards were shut. Emergency kits were intact. The kitchen still held canned supplies long past expiration. On first view, it looked exactly like an abandoned station should look, frozen, still, empty. But as the team moved deeper inside, details stopped fitting that picture. The communications room had power residue in its capacitor banks, not much, but recent. A trace charge had moved through the system within the last 2 days. The main battery backup, however, was completely dead. That meant the transmission had not come from normal station power. Someone suggested a portable source. A field generator, an external battery. A sabotage pack attached to the panel, nothing like that was found. Then the engineer noticed the floor. The central corridor had a slight downward tilt that did not match the original plans. Laser measurement confirmed a subsidence of nearly 4 centimeters around the radio room. It was subtle but real. More disturbing was the pattern of stress fractures around the anchor bolts. The concrete footing beneath the station had shifted upward from below. Not collapsed, lifted, as if pressure had risen under the foundation. Ground-penetrating radar was flown in on the second day. The first scans were unreadable. Dense mineral interference scrambled the returns. The second pass showed a cavity beneath the station, extending far deeper than expected. The island's bedrock model did not predict an empty space there. Older geological surveys showed only solid basalt. But there was a void, roughly rectangular. Too clean to be natural. The discovery forced a second team to the island. More specialists, better imaging tools, thermal probes, fiber optic cameras, seismic equipment. Every method they used produced the same problem. There was space under Halcyon Station, but no official record of any construction below it. And there was one more detail. The cavity had internal partitions, straight lines. Vertical separations, right angles. It looked less like a cave and more like rooms. The deeper the investigation went, the less Halcyon Station looked like an isolated weather outpost. It looked like a lid. As soon as excavation planning began, the clues became stranger. On the third night, a portable recorder left in the communications room captured 3 hours of low-frequency sound. Most of it was wind vibration through the mast. But buried under that noise was a repeated sequence of knocks. 3 slow impacts, a pause, then 2 more. The pattern repeated 17 times between 1:12 and 1:41. The next night, the pattern changed. 2 impacts, pause. 3. The team first blamed thermal contraction in the steel frame. But metal stress does not change rhythm like that. It does not pause. It does not answer. Then one of the seismic sensors went dark for exactly 17 seconds. When it came back online, its internal clock was behind by 4 minutes. No other device on site showed the same drift. The fiber optic probe produced even worse results. Engineers drilled a narrow inspection bore beside the foundation and lowered a camera into the cavity below. For the first 20 meters, the shaft showed fractured basalt and ice, then the walls changed. The camera light fell across a flat vertical surface, black, smooth to regular. The probe moved lower. What it found should not have been there. A wall, not rock. Not poured concrete, not reinforced steel. The material reflected almost no light. The surface was dry despite the surrounding ice. Across one section ran shallow grooves arranged in repeating parallel rows. They did not match language, but they did not look random either. The live feed lasted 41 seconds. Then the image buckled inward as if the lens had passed through heat above a fire. The video twisted, Horizontal lines tore across the frame. For one instant, a shape appeared at the edge of the light. Tall, narrow, motionless, then the cable snapped. When they pulled the probe back up, the last 5 meters were stripped clean, outer sheath gone. Internal wires exposed and fused together as if they had been dragged across intense friction or heat. But the borehole itself showed no sign of collapse. Another clue came from the old station records. Hidden in a maintenance archive was a damaged audio file dated 3 weeks before the evacuation. Most of it was unreadable. But after enhancement, investigators isolated a short exchange between two crew members. One voice said, "It sounds closer tonight." The other replied, "Don't write it down." That line mattered because someone already had. 3 pages were torn from the station logbook. Not missing from age, removed deliberately. The torn edges were clean. Nearby entries mentioned sleeplessness, headaches, equipment failure, and a smell like hot metal after rain. The final intact log, written 2 days before evacuation, included one last sentence. "Do not stay after 2 o'clock." No explanation followed. The deepest shift in the case came from old supply manifests. Halcyon Station was officially built as a weather relay platform 23 years before the final transmission. That much was documented. But shipping records from the station's construction year listed materials that made no sense for a surface outpost. Heavy excavation drills, shock dampening braces, ventilation ducting rated for underground spaces, and enough reinforced concrete for a foundation 3 times larger than the building above. Those supplies were delivered, but they never appeared in the final architectural plans. Something had been removed from the record. Investigators traced the construction contractor. It no longer existed. Its financial backer had been absorbed into another firm. Most employee files were gone. But one retired surveyor was eventually found living inland, decades after the original build. At first, he denied knowing Halcyon. Then he was shown a photograph of the station. He went silent for a long time. Then he said the structure on the cliff was not the real project, it was the cover. According to his account, the first drilling team on the island broke into an artificial chamber already buried inside the basalt. Not built by them, already there, the chamber extended deeper than their equipment could map. Work was halted. A sealed report was filed. Then a smaller surface station was constructed directly above the access point. Not to study weather, to monitor what was below. He claimed the workers were told it was a wartime bunker from an unknown naval program. But he never believed that. The walls were wrong. The dimensions were wrong, and the temperature inside the lower passage was always warmer than the surrounding rock, even when the island above was frozen solid. Then he said something investigators never released publicly. On the final week of construction, one worker disappeared underground for less than 10 minutes. When he came back up, he was holding a portable radio, not one of theirs. A radio covered in dust, older than their own equipment by decades. And it was still transmitting. No source was ever identified. No matching device was ever found. The retired surveyor refused further interviews after that. Within a month, he was dead from what officials described as natural causes. But before he died, he mailed a single envelope to the inquiry office. Inside was a sketch, a rough hand-drawn cross-section of Halcyon Station. At the top, the weather outpost. Below it, a shaft, below that, a corridor. And beneath the corridor, one final note written in the margin. Sound rises before movement. There are several explanations for what happened at Halcyon Station. None of them solve everything. The first theory is classified infrastructure. According to this idea, Halcyon concealed an undisclosed military or intelligence facility buried beneath the island. The final transmission may have come from a hidden maintenance chamber, an emergency cache, or a sealed access system that briefly reactivated. The voice could have belonged to a trespasser, a survivor, or someone connected to the original project. This theory explains the missing records. It explains the false construction plans. It explains why material shipments exceeded the visible station design. But it does not explain the age of the lower structure, or the strange wall material, or the earlier radio reportedly found underground before Halcyon was even completed. The second theory is geological, but stranger. Some researchers believe the cavity may be part of an unusual volcanic formation with conductive minerals capable of storing and releasing electromagnetic energy. In rare conditions, signals could distort, old audio might reappear. Human voices could seem present when they are only fragments replayed by geology itself. It is an elegant idea, cold rock, trap charge. A natural archive beneath the island, but that theory breaks against the details. The final transmission was not a random echo. It responded to the present with meaningful language. It referenced depth. It referenced a hidden lower level. And the repeated knocking patterns seemed to change after investigators arrived. That leaves the third theory, the one most experts avoid saying aloud. That something was already beneath Halcyon long before the station was built. Something structured, something hidden. Something that produced interference, heat, and signal anomalies for decades. Maybe the first builders found it and sealed it. Maybe later crews heard it through the floor. Maybe the final transmission was not a warning sent from the station above. Maybe it came from lower down, and if that is true, the most disturbing part is not that someone found it. The most disturbing part is that it may have tried to answer. After months of study, the site was closed again. Excavation plans were suspended. Official access was restricted. Most equipment was removed. Halcyon Station was sealed for the second time. No public explanation was released, but one final event entered the record. 2 weeks after the investigation ended, an automated satellite pass captured a thermal image of the island just before dawn. The station itself was dark. The cliff was frozen. The sea below was black and still. Yet beneath the station, inside the rock, there was a vertical column of heat, narrow, straight, deep. It extended far below the known cavity, beyond the range of the earlier scans, descending into the island like a shaft with no visible end. At the top of that heat column, directly under the radio room, was a single bright point. Small, focused, pulse-like, the analysts first thought it was an error. Then the brightness changed in intervals, 3 pulses, pause to pulses. The same pattern recorded inside the station. The image was archived and marked inconclusive. Months later, an audio technician reviewing the original 17-second transmission made one last adjustment to the noise floor. He isolated a layer beneath the human voice, a texture too low for most speakers to reproduce. Slowed down and amplified, it resembled a second sound source under the words, not speech, not machinery. A long, dense resonance rising from below, like air moving through a vast enclosed space. And at the very end of that layer, after the voice says it is under the station, another sound appears for less than 1 second, a reply quiet, metallic. Almost too faint to hear, but not faint enough. The technician described it as a word, just one: open. No one has explained the reply, no one has explained the heat below the cliff, and no one has returned underground. Halcyon Station still stands above the frozen bay. Its doors are locked, its windows are dark. Its mast is silent in the fog, but sometimes, in winter, emergency monitors still register low-band interference from that part of the sea. Always after 2 o'clock. Always from the same coordinates, and always too weak to understand. If the final transmission was not sent from the abandoned station above, but from something hidden beneath it, then what exactly was waiting in the dark long before anyone built Halcyon there?